I looked across the cold mahogany table as the human resources director slid my termination notice toward me. She was firing me. She thought she was saving the company $4 million. She had this pathetic, rehearsed look of fake sympathy on her face, completely unaware that by sliding that single piece of paper across the desk, she had just triggered a hidden legal trap. A trap that would cost her boss $8 million, destroy his reputation, and burn their corporate empire to the ground. My name is Morgan. I am 33 years old, and this is the story of how I legally dismantled the executives who tried to bury me. To understand the sheer magnitude of their mistake, you need to understand the stage they set. For 5 years, I was the invisible engine driving Zenith Financial. I worked 80-hour weeks. I built their flagship portfolio from a concept into a reality. I had just secured a $28 million account from a napkin sketch I drew on a late-night flight to Chicago. I delivered 12 consecutive quarters of massive, undeniable growth. But in the corporate world, loyalty is an illusion. You do not build empires. You get rented by them. And the second your value becomes too expensive, they look for a way to discard you. The chief executive officer was a man named Marcus. Marcus was the kind of leader who wore custom suits, talked endlessly about innovation on business podcasts, and took absolute credit for my financial models. He was a coward. He hated the fact that a woman 10 years younger than him was the actual brain behind his success. I knew the betrayal was coming. When you navigate high-stakes finance for a living, you develop a sixth sense, a psychic warning system that triggers the second the vultures start circling. So, during my contract renegotiation in the fourth quarter of last year, I built myself a parachute. It was a highly specific, heavily encrypted kill switch buried deep within the legal jargon of my employment agreement. I named it Clause 11C. 12 months later, the trap finally snapped. It happened on a Tuesday. I knew something was wrong the exact second I stepped into the lobby. The front desk receptionist refused to make eye contact with me. Her eyes were magnetically glued to the floor. Before I even reached the elevators, a blank calendar invite popped up on my phone. Urgent performance review, 9:15 in the morning. Conference room B. No subject line, no agenda. I took the long way to the meeting. I wanted to scan the hallways. I watched my colleagues avoid my gaze. One junior analyst I had personally mentored for 3 years literally ducked into the copy room to hide from me. The smell of corporate betrayal is distinct. It smells like cheap coffee, sweat, and panic. I slipped into my private office and unlocked my bottom drawer. I pulled out my original leather-bound contract, 8 pages of pure legal strategy. I ran my finger over the initials at the bottom of page 4. Marcus had signed it. The human resources director had signed it. The entire compensation committee had initialed every single paragraph. They signed it, but they never read the fine print. I folded the papers, placed them inside my portfolio, smoothed my tailored jacket, and then walked to the execution room. The blinds in conference room B were drawn completely shut. The human resources director was sitting there with 2 compliance representatives who looked like statues. There were no laptops. There were no performance reports. There was no discussion to be had. Just the guillotine waiting for its cue. Marcus did not even have the spine to show up to his own ambush. The human resources director delivered her pre-written script. She told me they were restructuring. She told me my position was being eliminated, effective immediately. She said the decision was final and approved by upper leadership. I did not sit down. I stood tall. I looked down at her and simply said that I understood. She blinked. She looked completely thrown off. She was waiting for a meltdown. She expected me to cry, to scream, or to beg for my job. She expected a panicked woman worrying about her mortgage. She did not realize that I was not a victim. I was the architect of her impending doom. She nervously asked me to hand over my corporate security badge. I unclipped it from my belt, placed it gently on the table, smiled at her, and walked out. I did not go down to the parking garage. I did not leave the building. A quiet exit makes people assume you have accepted defeat. They think you are broken, but I was not broken. I was loaded, armed with paper and their own signatures. And they had just handed me the detonator. Before I reveal exactly how I weaponized their own legal department against them, if you love seeing toxic corporate bosses get completely destroyed by their own arrogance, hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment telling me the worst excuse a boss has ever given you, and drop a like on this video. Now, let us watch their empire burn in high definition. Instead of heading to the exit, I swiped into the executive elevator, using a master access code they forgot to deactivate. I pressed the button for floor 45, the legal and compliance department. The legal floor always smelled like printer toner and buried secrets. I walked straight past the framed photos of past executives and headed for the corner office. I was looking for the assistant general counsel. His name was David. David was a sharp, quiet lawyer who used to shadow my negotiations. He knew where all the corporate bodies were buried. I walked into his office and shut the heavy oak door behind me. I told him I had just been fired, effective immediately. No cause cited, no severance discussion. I watched his face drop. He knew I had just closed the biggest account in the history of the firm. He asked me what happened. I did not explain the drama. I opened my leather folder, pulled out my contract, and placed it on the glass desk in front of him. I told him to read Clause 11C, Paragraph 3, Subsection A. I watched his eyes scan the legal jargon. I watched his pupils dilate. I watched his breathing completely stop. He asked me, in a horrified whisper, if I had added this language during my fourth quarter renegotiations. I confirmed that I did. I reminded him that Marcus had initialed every single page because he claimed he did not have time to read legal nonsense. David sat back in his chair. He looked at me like he was staring at a ghost. He recounted the terms aloud, as if trying to convince himself they were real. He stated that the clause was a death sentence. It explicitly dictated that if I was involuntarily terminated without documented cause, within 24 hours of my scheduled equity vesting date, the termination would be classified legally as constructive fraud. I told him to keep reading the penalty section. He swallowed hard. He outlined the consequences. He realized out loud that they did not just owe me my standard $4 million bonus. The clause triggered an accelerated payout. They owed me double the equity value plus 50% of my final year-based salary plus immediate indemnity damages. They fired me today because my massive equity package was scheduled to vest tomorrow at noon. Marcus and the human resources team thought firing me one day early would void the contract and save the company millions. I looked at David and explained their fatal error. Termination did not void the obligation. The termination was the exact trigger that activated the massive multiplier. David rubbed his temples. He told me that Marcus signed it. He told me human resources signed it. He realized he was looking at a nuclear bomb sitting on his desk. He warned me that the executive floor was going to try to bury this the second they found out. I smiled. A cold, genuine smile. I told him they could not bury it. I explained that I had the digital metadata, time-stamped, notarized, backed up on 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. I even had a screen recording of the exact virtual meeting where Marcus approved the equity plan without reading it. I informed David that I had already forwarded the entire annotated legal packet to the private email of the lead board attorney exactly 5 minutes ago. The fire was already spreading. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I told David I was not here for revenge. I was here for enforcement. I walked out of the legal department without looking back. I stepped into the elevator. The stainless steel doors closed. My pulse was resting at a cool 60 beats per minute. Downstairs, on the executive floor, they thought they had won. They were patting themselves on the back for saving money. They had absolutely no idea that I had just locked the doors, lit the match, and walked away. I was sitting at a quiet corner table in a cafe just 4 blocks away from the Zenith Financial headquarters. I was sipping a black coffee, staring at the towering glass windows of the building I used to run. I could not hear the screaming happening inside, but I knew exactly what it looked like. The human resources director stormed into her department's war room. She was sweating through the silk lining of her expensive blazer. She slammed her laptop onto the conference table and started barking orders at her junior assistants. She demanded documentation. She ordered them to find a disciplinary waiver, an incident log, a late arrival, a missed deadline. She needed absolutely anything to justify my immediate termination. Her assistants frantically searched the entire employee database. They found nothing. My record was completely flawless. 12 consecutive quarters of perfect performance reviews and millions of dollars in generated revenue. Not a single negative note in 5 years. She realized she had just fired a spotless, high-level executive without a single shred of documented cause, exactly 24 hours before a massive equity payout. She picked up her phone to call Marcus, the chief executive officer. Her hands were shaking so violently that she dropped the device onto the floor. The quiet alarm had started to ring. Upstairs, in the executive penthouse, Marcus was sitting at the head of the boardroom table. He was probably checking his custom watch, feeling incredibly proud of himself. He thought he was a strategic genius. The heavy oak doors swung open. Evelyn walked in. Evelyn was the lead legal counsel for the board of directors. She was a woman who never smiled, never raised her voice, and never lost a lawsuit in her entire career. She did not sit down. She walked straight to the head of the table and dropped a heavy stack of printed documents onto the polished wood. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Marcus looked up, visibly annoyed. He asked her what the problem was. Evelyn looked at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Marcus," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Please tell me you did not actually terminate Morgan this morning." Marcus smirked. He leaned back in his leather chair and crossed his arms. "Of course I did. Her $4 million equity bonus vests tomorrow at noon. By eliminating her position today, I just saved this company a fortune. The board should be thanking me." Evelyn slowly took off her reading glasses. She placed them on the table. "You did not save us a fortune, Marcus. You just committed corporate suicide." Marcus frowned. He uncrossed his arms. He told her she was overreacting. He said that firing an employee before their stock vests is a standard corporate maneuver. Evelyn opened the folder. She slid page 4 of my employment contract across the table. She pointed directly to his signature in the bottom right corner. "Read Clause 11C, Evelyn commanded. Marcus squinted at the paper. Evelyn did not wait for him. She recited it from memory. In the event of involuntary or constructive termination without documented cause, within 24 hours preceding a scheduled equity vesting event, the termination shall be classified legally as bad faith dismissal. The employee shall be entitled to full equity acceleration, an immediate payout at current market value, and additional compensation calculated at double their base salary." The boardroom went completely, terrifyingly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Marcus lost all the color in his face. He stammered. He said that was impossible. He said they could fight it in court. He claimed I must have sneaked the clause into the paperwork at the last minute. Evelyn let out a cold, pitying laugh. "She did not sneak anything into this contract," Evelyn said. "She submitted the draft directly to the legal team. She highlighted the clause in bold text. She warned you about it, and you signed it anyway, Marcus, because you were too arrogant to read the fine print." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He yelled that he would not pay me a single dime. He ordered Evelyn to bury the contract. He told her to find a loophole. Evelyn looked at him like he was a foolish child. "There are no loopholes," she said flatly. "Morgan already forwarded the entire annotated legal packet to the private servers of the board of directors. She submitted it 30 minutes after you fired her. She has the digital timestamps. She has the metadata. She has the video recordings of the quarterly approval meetings." Marcus put both hands on the table, breathing heavily. "It gets worse," Evelyn continued, twisting the knife. "Because of the penalty multipliers in Clause 11C, the company does not owe her $4 million anymore. We legally owe her $8,500,000. And if she takes us to arbitration for retaliation, it will cost us over $12 million. Marcus collapsed back into his chair. The reality of his arrogance was finally crushing him. He had handed a loaded gun to the smartest woman in the building, and she had aimed it directly at his head. "What does she want?" Marcus asked in a panicked, breathless whisper. He assumed I wanted my job back. He assumed I wanted to negotiate a settlement. Evelyn stared at him. "She does not want anything, Marcus. She does not need to negotiate. She already won." While they were suffocating in the boardroom, my phone vibrated on the cafe table. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number, but I knew exactly who was calling. It was the chairman of the board of directors, and it was time to collect my debt. I sat at the corner table of the cafe, watching the rain hit the glass. My phone vibrated against the wood. The caller identification displayed a private number, but I knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. It was Richard, the chairman of the board of directors for Zenith Financial, a billionaire who spent his entire life intimidating people into submission. I took a slow sip of my coffee before I answered. I did not say hello. I simply stated my name. Richard did not bother with pleasantries. He told me that Evelyn had briefed the board on the situation regarding my termination. He tried to use his deep, authoritative voice to control the narrative. He said that there had been a gross miscommunication between human resources and the executive team. He claimed they valued my contributions and wanted to offer me my position back, along with a modest bump in my base salary. He was treating me like a naive employee who would be grateful to have her job back. He was trying to stop the bleeding before the financial markets found out. I let a long, heavy silence hang on the line. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own desperation. I told Richard that I did not want my job back. I explained that I was not interested in a salary bump, and I was certainly not interested in their apologies. I recited the exact mathematics of Clause 11C. I told him that Zenith Financial legally owed me $8,500,000. I informed him that if they forced me to take this to arbitration, I would file a public lawsuit for bad faith dismissal, retaliation, and breach of contract. I promised him that the resulting public relations nightmare would cause their stock price to plummet, costing the board hundreds of millions of dollars in shareholder value. I heard Richard take a sharp, jagged breath. The intimidation tactic had failed. He was cornered. He asked me, his voice significantly lower this time, what my terms were to make this go away quietly. I gave him 3 non-negotiable demands. First, the full $8,500,000 was to be wired into my private accounts within 48 hours. Second, they would draft a flawless, impenetrable non-disclosure agreement. And third, the most important demand. I demanded the immediate public termination of Marcus. I told Richard that Marcus was a liability, who had cost the board millions through sheer arrogance. I wanted him stripped of his title, I wanted him stripped of his unvested equity, and I wanted him escorted out of the building by security, today. Richard tried to hesitate. He said terminating a chief executive officer without notice was complicated. I told him he had exactly 60 seconds to decide before I called my external legal counsel to file the lawsuit. It only took him 15 seconds to agree to every single term. I did not have to be inside the building to know exactly how Marcus's execution played out. The internal rumors verified every satisfying detail. Less than an hour after my phone call with Richard, the board of directors convened an emergency remote session. Marcus was summoned back into the boardroom. He probably thought they were going to strategize a way to fight me. Instead, Richard delivered the death blow. The board voted unanimously to terminate Marcus for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Because he was fired for cause, the cause being his catastrophic mishandling of my contract, his own golden parachute was completely voided. Marcus lost everything in a matter of 5 minutes. He lost his massive executive salary. He lost millions of dollars in unvested company stock. But the true tragedy for Marcus was the debt. Men like Marcus live far beyond their means. He had leveraged his unvested equity to take out massive loans for his custom sports cars, his luxury penthouse, and his expensive lifestyle. Without that stock, he was instantly millions of dollars in the hole. He screamed. He threw a chair against the boardroom wall. He threatened to sue the entire board. But Richard was ruthless. He signaled the corporate security guards waiting outside the door. 2 large men walked into the boardroom. They asked Marcus to hand over his badge and his company phone. They did not let him go back to his office to pack his belongings. They flanked him on both sides and escorted him directly to the freight elevator. They marched the former chief executive officer through the crowded main lobby. Hundreds of employees, including the human resources director who had tried to fire me that morning, watched in stunned silence as Marcus was physically removed from the building and thrown onto the rainy sidewalk. He was publicly humiliated. He was financially ruined. He was completely destroyed by the very system he thought he controlled. By Friday afternoon, the $8,500,000 cleared into my bank account. The money was real. The victory was absolute. I spent the weekend browsing real estate listings in Southern Europe. I was completely satisfied. The mouse had not just escaped the maze, she had bought the maze and bulldozed it. But revenge has a funny way of refusing to stay quiet. It was late Tuesday night, exactly 1 week after my termination. I was sitting in the living room of my high-rise apartment, drinking a glass of vintage red wine, watching the city lights flicker below. The storm outside was violent. Thunder shook the massive glass windows of my living room. My building had state-of-the-art security. A 24-hour concierge. Keycard access only. Nobody gets up to the penthouse floor without my explicit permission. But at exactly 11:45 at night, the heavy wooden door of my apartment rattled. Someone was trying the handle. I froze. My wine glass stopped halfway to my mouth. Someone was out there. Then came the pounding. It was heavy, desperate, and aggressive, fists slamming against the thick wood. My intercom screen lit up. The security feed from the hallway camera flickered onto the display. Standing in the hallway, completely soaked in rain, looking like a deranged animal, was Marcus. His custom suit was ruined. His hair was a mess. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. And in his right hand, he was gripping something heavy and metallic. He stared directly into the security camera. He knew I was watching. He leaned close to the lens, his breath fogging the glass. And he whispered something that made my blood run completely cold. Through the grainy security feed of my intercom, I watched the former chief executive officer of Zenith Financial completely unravel. Marcus leaned his face so close to the camera lens that his breath fogged the glass. Rainwater was dripping from his ruined hair. He raised the heavy metallic object in his right hand. It was a steel tire iron, likely pulled from the trunk of whatever car he was sleeping in tonight. "You took my life," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and absolute despair. "You took everything. Open the door, Morgan. Open the door, right now." He raised the tire iron and slammed it against my front door. The sound echoed through my massive apartment. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have screamed or hidden in their bedroom or begged him to stop. But I am not a normal person. I am the woman who calculated his destruction down to the very last decimal point. I did not move from my velvet armchair. I did not spill a single drop of my vintage red wine. I calmly reached over to the intercom panel on my end table. I pressed the silver button to activate the two-way audio. "Marcus," I said. My voice echoed through the speaker in the hallway. It was smooth, cold, and completely devoid of fear. He froze. He lowered the tire iron and stared directly into the camera. "You have exactly 3 minutes before the police arrive," I informed him quietly. "And you are currently being recorded and broadcast live to a secure off-site cloud server. The door you're hitting is a custom-built, reinforced steel core security door. You could swing that piece of metal for 10 years and you would not even scratch the paint." Marcus stepped back. His chest was heaving. "You ruined me," he screamed at the camera, tears of frustration mixing with the rain on his face. "I have millions of dollars in debt. The bank took my penthouse. My wife filed for divorce this morning. I have absolutely nothing left because of you." I took a slow sip of my wine. It tasted exceptional. "You have nothing left because of your own arrogance, Marcus," I replied. "You thought you could steal my hard work and throw me onto the street without consequences. You handed me a loaded legal contract, and you begged me to pull the trigger. Do not blame me for the bullet." I released the intercom button. I cut the audio. I watched the screen in silence. Marcus stared at the camera for another 10 seconds. He realized he was not looking at a victim. He was looking at a fortress he could never, ever breach. The tire iron slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor of the hallway. The great, untouchable executive dropped to his knees. He buried his face in his hands and began to sob. It was not a dignified cry. It was the ugly, pathetic weeping of a broken man who finally understood that his life was completely over. 2 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. 4 armed city police officers stepped into the hallway. They drew their weapons and ordered him to the ground. Marcus did not fight them. He just laid face down on the floor, letting them pull his arms behind his back and snap the cold metal handcuffs around his wrists. I turned off the security monitor, finished my glass of wine, and went to sleep. I slept for 9 uninterrupted hours. 3 years have passed since the night Marcus was arrested in my hallway. People love to consume stories about forgiveness. They love to read books that claim holding onto a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. They tell you that you must let go of the anger in order to truly heal. I think those people have simply never executed a flawless, multi-million-dollar corporate revenge. I did not drink poison, I served it. I poured it into a crystal glass, handed it to the men who tried to destroy me, and smiled while they swallowed every single drop. Let me tell you exactly where they are now. Marcus was charged with felony attempted burglary and terroristic threats. Because of his massive corporate debt and frozen assets, he could not afford a high-powered defense attorney. He was forced to use a public defender. He pleaded guilty to avoid serving time in a state penitentiary. He received 5 years of strict probation. But with a violent felony on his permanent public record and a very public termination for gross corporate negligence, his career in finance was permanently annihilated. Today, the former chief executive officer of Zenith Financial works the night shift at a 24-hour toll booth on the outskirts of the city. He lives in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment above a loud laundromat. He has no equity. He has no power. He spends his nights handing out change to tired truck drivers, completely erased from the world he used to rule. The human resources director, Sloan, was quietly forced to resign 3 weeks after my payout. The board of directors needed a scapegoat to blame for the contract oversight, and they chose her. She lost her corporate reputation and now works as an entry-level recruiter for a mid-tier regional grocery chain. As for Zenith Financial, The board was so traumatized by the $8,500,000 loss and the public humiliation of their leadership that the stock plummeted. They were eventually acquired by a larger conglomerate and dissolved into a subsidiary. The Zenith name does not even exist anymore. And me? I took my $8,500,000 and I did not just buy a vacation home. I bought power. I am now 36 years old. I am the founder and managing director of my own boutique wealth management firm. My office is located on the 50th floor of a glass skyscraper. I make the rules. I write the contracts. And I never ever let arrogant men take credit for my intellect. When you navigate the corporate world, you will inevitably meet a Marcus or a Sloan. You will meet people who view your talent as a threat and your loyalty as a weakness. They will try to use you. They will try to silence you. They will try to throw you away when you become too expensive. When that day comes, do not scream. Do not cry. Do not beg human resources for mercy. Smile. Read the fine print. Build a parachute they cannot see. Because the ultimate revenge is not screaming at your enemies. The ultimate revenge is watching them trigger their own destruction, while you sit safely behind a reinforced door, drinking a perfect glass of wine. My name is Morgan, and I never leave ashes behind.